I was 32 years old when I decided to take a week off work and head out into the forest alone. I hadn't done a solo camping trip in years. My last one was back in college, and even then, it was more of a lazy weekend with beer and music by the lake. This time, I wanted something different. I wanted isolation, stillness, time to breathe away from screens and emails and the pressure of normal life. I worked in a small office as a network technician, and my days mostly consisted of sitting in front of monitors, sipping coffee that tasted like burnt plastic, pretending I was okay with how routine everything had gotten. The idea started after a long day in June, when I found myself staring at the ceiling fan in my apartment with this hollow feeling in my chest. I needed something to shake me out of that rut. I looked at a map, found a national forest I hadn't explored yet, and marked a remote spot a few miles off any known trail. It wasn't one of those fancy, maintained campsites with fire pits and outhouses. It was nothing but trees, a small river nearby, and a few game trails probably made by deer and bears. I planned carefully. I packed a heavy-duty tent, 2 sleeping bags. I always over-prepare: bear spray, a portable stove, freeze-dried food, a decent water filter, a knife, a hatchet, waterproof boots, and a headlamp with extra batteries. I also brought a small foldable solar panel to keep my phone and GPS charged just in case. Even though I didn't want to rely on electronics, I wasn't stupid either. I let my cousin know where I was going and told him to check in with me via text every night. If I didn't reply for 2 days in a row, he had instructions to call for help. The drive to the forest was peaceful. It took nearly 6 hours, but the last 2 were through winding mountain roads that twisted through tall pine forests and past empty, foggy valleys. The closer I got, the more I felt that strange excitement that only comes when you step away from civilization. I parked my truck off a fire road, locked it, and started hiking with my gear strapped to my back. It took me most of the day to reach the spot I had picked out on the map. The terrain was rough in places, especially near the creek, but I eventually found a clearing that was flat and dry, with enough space for my tent and a little room to walk around. I set up camp, boiled water for a meal, and watched the light fade through the branches of the trees above. It was quiet, really quiet, the kind of quiet you only get when you're miles away from traffic and other people. No phones ringing, no voices, no hum of electricity, just the sound of water trickling and leaves moving slightly in the wind. That first night, I didn't sleep too well. I wasn't scared exactly, but my brain was on high alert. Every crack of a branch or rustle in the leaves made my body stiffen. It took a while before I was able to convince myself it was just animals. Raccoons, maybe deer, the usual. My hands stayed on my knife most of the night. By the second day, I was starting to settle in. I hiked around the area, followed the river upstream for about an hour, took a bunch of photos, and gathered some dry wood. I didn't build a fire the first night, but on the second, I did. There was something comforting about the flames, even though I was technically in bear country. I kept my food sealed and stored away from camp, hung up properly from a high branch. I wasn't taking chances. Around the third day, I began to notice little things that felt off. Nothing huge at first, just small details that started to build up over time. For example, I woke up that morning and noticed my camp chair, which I had folded and leaned against a log, was now lying flat on its side. I brushed it off, thinking the wind must have knocked it over. Later that afternoon, I went down to the river to refill my water and found a few odd footprints in the muddy bank. They weren't animal tracks, not like the ones I'd seen from deer or raccoons. These were boot prints, adult-sized, treaded, definitely not mine. I checked the sole of my boot just to be sure, and it didn't match. Whoever left them had a different pattern. The mud was soft, and the print looked fresh, maybe made earlier that day. The direction of the tracks suggested someone had walked along the river from upstream, stopped at the same spot I used, then turned back. I stood there for a few minutes, staring at them, trying to figure out whether I should be concerned. Technically, it wasn't illegal for someone else to be out there. It was public land. But the spot I picked was far from any trails, and I hadn't seen a single person on my hike in or after. No voices in the distance, no campfire smoke, nothing. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about the prints and the possibility that someone might be nearby. I didn't hear anything unusual, but I kept the bear spray close and didn't bother lighting a fire. I figured less light might mean less attention. By the fourth day, things started to get worse. I woke up early and went to check on my food stash, and it was gone. Not ripped down or scattered like an animal would do, just gone. The rope was still tied to the tree branch, the carabiner clipped in place, but the dry sack that held all my food was missing. My first thought was maybe I tied it wrong and it fell, but when I looked around, there was no sign of it on the ground. No torn fabric, no spilled oatmeal packets. It was just gone. That's when the fear started to set in. Not panic, but that quiet, creeping kind that lingers in your stomach and makes everything you hear sound like a threat. Someone had taken it. And if someone was willing to steal food from a stranger's camp this far out, what else were they willing to do? I spent the rest of the day trying to decide what to do. I still had some backup food in my backpack, protein bars, a bit of jerky, but it wouldn't last more than a day or two. I debated packing up and hiking out early, but the thought of walking through that thick forest with someone possibly watching me made my skin crawl. If they had been near enough to steal my food, they could be watching right now. I didn't go far from my camp that day. I kept checking the trees, listening for twigs snapping, movement, anything. As the sun went down, I made a small fire more for comfort than anything else. I was too anxious to eat. My stomach felt like a knot. That night was the worst. Around 1 or 2 a.m., I heard footsteps. Real, slow, deliberate footsteps. Not an animal crashing through the underbrush, but the sound of a person trying not to make noise. Except the forest was so quiet, every leaf crunch sounded louder than it should have. I stayed completely still in my sleeping bag, holding my knife in one hand and bear spray in the other. The footsteps circled the tent. Once, then again. I didn't hear breathing, no voice, nothing. Just slow movement through the dry leaves. I waited for hours before I moved. By the time the sky turned pale with morning light, I was sweating and sore from lying so still. I got up quietly and looked around. There were no fresh footprints visible from inside the tent, but when I walked toward the edge of camp, I found a small pile of stones arranged neatly near a tree about 20 feet away. 5 flat rocks stacked carefully on top of each other. I hadn't put them there. I didn't waste time that morning. I packed up everything, took down the tent, strapped on my bag, and started hiking out. I didn't eat. I didn't stop for water. I just moved. The entire way back, I kept expecting to see someone following me or hear more footsteps behind me, but there was nothing. Just the wind, the birds, and the sound of my boots on dirt. It took me most of the day to reach my truck. When I finally got there, I felt this huge wave of relief, but it didn't last long. I noticed 2 things immediately. First, the driver's side door handle had dirt smudges on it, like someone had tried to open it with muddy hands. And second, the passenger side window was cracked. Not shattered, not fully broken. Just a thin crack running down the middle like someone had pressed something hard against it. I unlocked the truck, checked inside. Nothing looked stolen, but everything felt wrong. Like someone had been inside, looked through my stuff, and put it all back. My glove box was slightly open. The receipts I'd left on the dashboard were gone. My heart started pounding again. I turned the engine, drove until I hit the highway, then kept driving until I got back home, hours away. I didn't tell many people about what happened. A few friends, my cousin. Most of them just shrugged it off. Maybe a hunter got lost, they said. Maybe some harmless hiker passed through. But I've spent enough time outdoors to know the difference between normal and wrong. Whoever was out there wasn't lost. They knew what they were doing. They waited until I was asleep. They stole my food, circled my tent, and left a mark just to let me know they were there. Maybe it was a warning, maybe something worse. I haven't gone camping alone since. I still hike sometimes, but only during the day, and always where there are other people nearby. I bought a dash cam for my truck. I changed the locks on my apartment door, even though I knew it was probably just paranoia. But there are nights when I wake up thinking I hear someone walking slowly outside my window, just like that night in the tent. Maybe they followed me. Maybe they're still out there in some part of the woods, waiting for the next person to set up camp too far from the trail. I went camping alone in the Ouachita Mountains in Arkansas last October. I'd been planning it for weeks, had the gear packed, maps printed, route marked, and all the food portioned out in Ziplocs. I needed to clear my head for a while. My job was eating me alive back home, and I just ended a long, drawn-out relationship that felt more like dragging a dead horse than loving someone. I didn't want any calls, no texts, no city noise, just woods, wind, and whatever peace I could dig out from the dirt. I parked my car near a gravel road, locked it, took a picture of the coordinates on my phone just in case I needed to find it again, then hiked into the trees. I followed an unmarked trail that led deeper into the forest, past thick clusters of pine and oak. The air felt sharp and clean, cold even though the sun was out. The silence was what I'd wanted, and that's what I got. Just the crunch of my boots, the hiss of wind, and birds shifting overhead. I camped the first night by a small creek. I pitched my tent on a flat bit of ground between two boulders, boiled some water for noodles, and read a few pages of a book under my headlamp until I fell asleep. It was a good start. The stars were out, the trees creaked softly in the wind, and I felt okay again for the first time in months. Just okay, not great, but okay is a start when you've been underwater for a while. The second day, I pushed deeper into the forest. No paths now, just reading the terrain and compass, heading southeast. The ground dipped and rose in slow waves. I passed through hollowed-out spaces full of ferns and moss, then steep rocky ridges where I had to use both hands to climb. I wasn't trying to reach a certain place, just move and breathe and not think. That evening, I found a nice clearing up on a small hill. The slope looked down on a wide stretch of woods with a creek far below. I set up camp and had a few protein bars for dinner. Around sunset, I sat on a rock and just watched the colors change across the trees. Orange, pink, then blue. I felt something close to peace. I wrote a few lines in my notebook, zipped into my tent, and went to sleep. That night, though, something changed. I woke up around 2 in the morning. I don't know why. I didn't hear anything specific, but I just opened my eyes and felt off. You know that feeling when someone's standing over you, even if you don't see them? It was kind of like that. I stayed still and listened. There was nothing at first, just the wind again, soft through the trees, the usual branches brushing each other. Then I heard a thump, not loud, but not natural either. It wasn't a branch or an animal rustling. It was like something solid stepping on dry ground. I stayed frozen. My tent was zipped shut. I didn't move. My sleeping bag was tight around me and I didn't want to make a sound. The thump came again, then a crunch. It sounded like a foot on leaves. I kept thinking it could be a deer, or a bear, or even a raccoon. But I've been in the woods a lot and animals don't move like that. There was a pause between the steps, like someone walking slow. And the weight of it, the way the leaves compacted and the earth gave, was too heavy for a raccoon or even a coyote. Then it stopped. I didn't hear anything else. I lay there, my chest tight, for maybe another half hour. Eventually, I must have dozed off again. When I woke up, it was light out, and I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. But when I stepped out of my tent and looked around, I saw boot prints. They weren't mine. Mine had a crisscross Vibram pattern. These were flat-soled, smooth, and round-toed. Old work boots or maybe even military style. They circled my tent once and then wandered off into the trees. That should have been enough to make me pack up and leave, but I told myself it was probably a hunter or another camper. Maybe they were curious. Maybe they didn't mean harm. But deep down, I knew it didn't feel right. People in the woods don't walk up to other people's tents in the middle of the night and walk in circles. Still, I stayed one more night. I moved camps, though. I hiked for hours, changed direction entirely, and tried to find a place where nobody could track me. I ended up setting up next to a rocky outcrop that backed up against a small cliff. That way, at least I knew no one could approach from behind. I cleared the ground, built a fire, and tried to make noise, banged my cookware together, even played music off my phone for a bit. I didn't want anyone thinking I was asleep early. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the crunch of footsteps. Every creak of the trees made me flinch. I had a knife tucked in my sleeping bag and my boots inside the tent. But nothing happened. No sounds, no movement, just cold air and silence. The next morning, I started heading back toward my car. I told myself I was done, trip over. I was maybe 10 miles out by then, but I had enough food and water to make it back without trouble. I could have stayed longer, but I didn't want to push my luck. About 2 hours into the hike back, I saw something that made my stomach sink. A piece of blue nylon fabric tied to a branch, about head height, fluttering in the wind. It was a strip from my tent bag, the same color, same material. I checked, it was gone from my pack. I hadn't dropped it. Someone had taken it from my gear, tied it there like a marker. That's when I knew someone was following me. I started moving faster. My legs were already tired from the past few days, but adrenaline kept me going. I didn't run, but I hiked hard nonstop. I checked behind me often, listened constantly. Nothing, just woods and shadows and the wind. Around midday, I took a break under a ledge, ate a granola bar, drank some water. That's when I saw the second marker. A small pile of stones, perfectly stacked, right beside where I dropped my pack. Not a natural pile, deliberate, like a trail sign, balanced just enough to catch attention. I knocked it over, didn't even think, just smashed it with my boot and moved on. That afternoon, the clouds came in heavy. The light dimmed. I knew I wouldn't make it all the way back to the car before dark, so I looked for a place to camp just for one last night. I found a small dip between two hills, covered in brush. I didn't make a fire, didn't cook. I just drank water and huddled in my sleeping bag inside the tent, knife beside me. That night was the worst. I didn't sleep at all. Around 1 a.m., I heard movement again. This time I was sure. Heavy steps, closer than before. Then a pause. Then something touched the side of my tent. Not a brush or a leaf. It was pressure. Fingers, maybe, pressing in slowly like testing the fabric. I didn't move. I held my breath. My hand was wrapped tight around the knife, and my whole body was locked up. The pressure disappeared. Silence again. Then more steps, slow, deliberate, moving around to the other side. I stayed like that for hours. I think I lost all sense of time. My ears were ringing from the tension. Every muscle ached. Eventually, the steps faded. When light finally came, I opened the tent and my stomach dropped. There was a single photo right outside the entrance. Polaroid. It showed my camp from the night before, the one backed up to the cliff. My tent, my backpack, even the small fire pit I'd built. The photo was taken from above, maybe from up in a tree. I don't know how long I stood there holding it, but eventually, I shoved everything into my pack without even folding it right and started moving. I didn't follow the trail. I bushwhacked. I went straight through thorn bushes and under low branches. I scratched my arms, tore my jacket, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out. By early afternoon, I finally saw the gravel road where I'd parked my car. The sight of it almost made me cry. I sprinted the last 100 feet, but the car had been messed with. Not broken into, just tampered. The windshield had deep scratch marks across it, like someone had dragged a knife across the glass. The rearview mirror had been ripped off and left sitting on the hood. The tires were intact, though, and the engine still turned. I didn't look back. I drove until I was off that road and back on the highway. I didn't stop for gas until I hit Little Rock. I didn't report it. I didn't know what to say. Someone followed me and left a photo? It wasn't illegal to walk near someone's camp. Nothing had been stolen. No damage I could prove. But I never went back. I still hike sometimes, but only in public parks, always with people. I don't camp alone anymore, and I think about that photo sometimes. The angle it was taken from, how close they must have been. I still don't know how long they'd been watching me, and that's the part that keeps me up the most. I've always liked camping. The quiet, the fresh air, the crackling fire, the stars far away from city lights. All of it was peaceful, almost like a reset button on life. I liked being in the woods, feeling small under the huge trees, surrounded by nothing but nature and my own thoughts. This trip was supposed to be no different. Just me, a few days off, and the forest. I picked a spot deep enough into the woods so that it wouldn't be crowded or noisy. I had done my research, checked maps, and found a little clearing near a small stream about an hour's hike from the nearest road. I packed everything carefully: tent, sleeping bag, cooking gear, food, water filter, flashlight, extra batteries, a knife, a first aid kit, and some basic tools. No fancy gadgets. I like to keep it simple. The day I arrived, the weather was perfect. Clear sky, light breeze, the sun warm but not too hot. I parked my car at the trailhead, double-checked my pack, and started hiking. The trail was quiet, just the crunch of dry leaves underfoot and the occasional bird song. The trees were tall and dense, mostly pine and birch, with patches of wildflowers near the stream. The smell of pine needles mixed with damp earth filled the air. It felt like I had stepped into a different world. After about an hour of walking, I reached the clearing I had picked out. It was bigger than I expected, with soft grass and a few flat rocks near the water. The stream was clear and cold, babbling gently over smooth stones. Perfect spot. I set up my tent quickly, making sure it was secure and flat. I gathered some dry wood for a fire and stacked it near the spot I planned to build a fire pit. I was careful not to leave any debris or leave a trace of me beyond what was necessary. As the sun dipped lower, the forest started to change. Shadows grew long and the temperature dropped. I built a small fire and cooked a simple meal: canned beans, some bread, and dried meat. The flames danced and crackled, throwing light on the trees and rocks nearby. I sat back, eating slowly and watching the fire. Night came fully. The stars were bright and countless, and the forest around me was silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the steady murmur of the stream. I liked this part: the peace, the feeling of being alone but safe in the wild. I checked my gear again, made sure the fire was controlled, and got ready to sleep. But then, as I was lying down in my sleeping bag, I started to notice something odd. A soft noise far away but definitely there. It was rhythmic, like footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Not too fast, not too close, but steady. I sat up and listened. The sound stopped. Then a minute later, it started again, from a slightly different direction. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other animal. Deer can sound like that sometimes, their hooves making noise on dry leaves or twigs, but something felt off. The steps were too heavy, too deliberate, and didn't match the pattern of a normal animal walking. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it around the clearing, pointing toward the direction where I thought the sound came from. Nothing but trees and darkness. I told myself to calm down. I wasn't alone, but I wasn't in danger. It was just the woods. I lay back down, but I kept hearing those steps off and on for the next hour or so. It felt like someone was walking around the edge of the clearing, circling it slowly. I had no phone signal, no way to call for help if anything went wrong. The closest other person was miles away. I tried to sleep, but my mind raced. I thought about what could be out there: a lost hiker, a hunter, or someone else camping nearby, or maybe something worse. I didn't want to jump to scary conclusions, but the feeling of being watched, of someone close by, was growing stronger. Suddenly, the noise stopped completely. The woods became completely still. No wind, no animals, no footsteps. The silence pressed in on me, louder than anything. My heart pounded in the dark. I sat up again, gripping my flashlight and the knife I kept by my side. The fire was nearly out, just a few glowing embers left. Then I heard it, a sharp crack, a branch snapping somewhere behind me, maybe 50 yards away. The noise was too loud to be an animal. Someone or something had stepped on a big stick or broken a branch. I froze, listening hard. My breath caught in my throat. The darkness felt thicker, heavier, as if it was closing in on me. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the noise. Nothing moved. The beam landed on trees, rocks, and bushes, but no sign of anything. I switched it off, then on again, trying to avoid giving away my position too much. My hands trembled. The only thing I could think of was to stay calm, stay quiet, and wait for daylight. I kept my knife close and tried to control my breathing. I didn't want to make a noise or draw attention. The forest was an unpredictable place at night, and I was suddenly painfully aware of how vulnerable I was. Hours passed in silence, except for my own breathing and heartbeat. I must have dozed off at some point, because when I woke, the first light of dawn was filtering through the trees. I felt exhausted, tense, and more awake than I had been all night. I took down the tent quickly, packed my gear without making a sound, and started walking back the way I came. The forest looked different in daylight, safe, familiar. The birds were singing, the stream gurgled happily, and the sun warmed my skin. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out there. As I walked, I kept my eyes open for any sign of someone else. Footprints, broken branches, trash. About halfway back to the trailhead, I saw something strange near the stream. A small pile of stones stacked carefully in a rough triangle shape. It didn't look natural. Someone had been there recently. I stopped and looked around. No footprints visible, but the ground was soft and muddy from last night's rain. The stones were dry, which meant whoever placed them had done it after the rain stopped. It felt like a marker, maybe a warning or a signal. I took a picture with my phone before moving on. My hands still shook. I picked up my pace. Back at the trailhead, I found my car just as I had left it. I locked the doors, started the engine, and pulled onto the road. I looked back once at the dark line of trees behind me, the place that had felt so peaceful and yet so dangerous all at once. I didn't tell anyone about the night. Not really. I couldn't explain the footsteps, the silence, or the stones. I don't know if it was a person or something else. But what I do know is this. Sometimes being alone in the wild isn't safe. Not because of ghosts or monsters, but because people can be unpredictable, and nature itself is raw and real. The woods don't forgive mistakes, and they don't care about your plans. That trip changed how I think about camping. I still go, but I'm careful. I make sure I'm never too far from help. I keep my senses sharp, and I always trust that feeling when something's not right. Because sometimes the scariest things aren't made up. They're just waiting out there in the dark, walking slowly around your camp. The sun was just starting to set as I drove the last few miles down the narrow dirt road, the wheels of my old truck crunching on loose gravel. The forest stretched thick on both sides, tall pines and oaks casting long shadows across the path. I'd been looking forward to this trip for weeks. A solo camping weekend deep in the woods where I could forget about the city noise, my phone, and the constant rush of everyday life. I needed a break from everything, and I figured that spending 2 days alone, just me and the wilderness, would be the perfect way to reset. I'd done plenty of camping before, but never completely alone this far in. The spot I'd chosen wasn't marked on any main map, only a small trail on a forest guide app that promised a quiet clearing by a creek, far from any trails or roads. That was exactly what I wanted. No people, no distractions, just the sounds of nature and the crackle of my campfire at night. The light was fading quickly now, the last slivers of gold slipping through the trees. I parked the truck at the edge of the trailhead, grabbed my pack, and started walking. The weight of my gear, tent, sleeping bag, food, water, and firewood, felt heavy on my shoulders, but it was manageable. I knew the walk to the clearing would take about an hour, but I was eager to get there and set up before dark. The forest was quiet except for the usual sounds. Birds calling their last songs, twigs snapping under my boots, the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. The trail was narrow, barely wide enough for a single person, and it twisted and turned, sometimes climbing steep slopes, other times dipping near small streams. I followed the markers I'd memorized from the app, counting the turns carefully. About halfway in, the sky had shifted from orange to deep blue, and stars began to peek out between the branches. I stopped to take a breath and looked around. The woods here felt ancient, trees towering overhead, thick trunks covered in moss, roots tangled in the dirt like giant snakes. I could hear the faint sound of running water somewhere ahead, and I knew I was close. Finally, after a steep climb over a fallen log, I stepped into the clearing. It was even better than I'd hoped. The creek ran along one side, clear and cold, bubbling over smooth stones. The grass was soft underfoot, dotted with wildflowers still clinging to their color in the fading light. There was enough flat ground for my tent, and a ring of stones perfect for a campfire. I set to work immediately, unpacking and pitching the tent as fast as I could. The air was already cooling, and the smell of pine and wet earth was sharp and fresh. I gathered dry branches for the fire, piling them neatly inside the stone ring. Once my shelter was ready, I struck a match and lit the kindling. The flames caught quickly, crackling and popping, sending warm orange light flickering over the trees. I cooked my simple dinner over the fire, canned beans heated in a small pot and some bread, then sat back against a log, letting the warmth seep into my bones. The night around me was deep and still, the stars shining brighter than I'd ever seen in the city. I felt a strange calm settling over me, the kind that only comes when you're truly alone and surrounded by silence. But that calm didn't last long. About an hour after dark, I heard the first sound that made me freeze. It was faint at first, just a rustle from the brush beyond the firelight. My heart jumped. I told myself it was probably a deer or some other animal, but the noise didn't stop. It moved closer, a low, scraping sound like something large dragging its weight over dry leaves and branches. I grabbed my flashlight and swung the beam into the woods, the narrow circle of light cutting through the darkness. At first, I saw nothing but shadows and twisted trunks. Then something moved. A large shape stepped into the light just beyond the tree line. It was hard to make out at first, dark fur, tall on its legs, bulky shoulders. My mind raced. Bear? Possibly. The thought sent a cold chill through me. I remembered the bear spray in my pack, and without thinking, I reached back and grabbed it. The shape hesitated, then stepped forward slowly. My flashlight flickered as my hands shook. The animal was close now, just beyond the reach of the fire's glow. I could see its eyes reflecting in the light, large and dark. It sniffed the air, then turned and disappeared back into the woods. I stayed frozen for a long minute, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My mind ran through every safety tip I'd learned. Stay calm, don't run, make yourself look big. But I was alone, miles from any help, with only a small tent and a fire between me and whatever was out there. After the noise died away, I tried to relax. The fire was still burning strong, and the creek's gentle babble filled the silence. I reminded myself that bears usually avoid humans, that it probably just wandered through looking for food and would leave soon. Still, sleep was impossible. Every sound, a branch snapping, the rustle of leaves, made me jump. I kept the fire alive, feeding it small sticks, shining my flashlight in random directions, trying to convince myself I was safe. Then, about 3 a.m, the worst sound came. A low growl close to the tent, right outside the thin nylon walls. I didn't move. My breath caught in my throat. The growling went on, slow and deep, almost like it was trying to test me, challenge me. The fire flickered as a sudden breeze swept through the clearing, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow moving along the tent's edge. I grabbed my flashlight again and clicked it on, pointing it directly at the spot where I'd seen the shadow. Nothing, but the growling stopped. I stayed awake the rest of the night, flashlight and bear spray ready, ears straining for any noise. The sun finally started to rise, bleeding pale light through the trees, and I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion wash over me. I didn't waste any time packing up. Every movement was quick but careful. I kept my eyes on the woods, expecting to see the bear or whatever it was watching me again. But nothing came. The hike back to the truck was tense. The forest that had seemed so peaceful the night before now felt heavy and ominous. Every sound sharper, every shadow darker. I kept my flashlight ready, even though the sun was fully up, and stayed close to the path. When I finally saw my truck, parked where I'd left it, I felt like I could breathe again. I tossed my pack in the back and sat behind the wheel for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel tight. My heart was still racing, Driving out of the forest, I looked back in the rearview mirror at the dense trees. I knew I'd come back to camp again someday, but not alone, and not without being better prepared. The woods hadn't been friendly this time, and I'd learned the hard way that nature isn't just beautiful and peaceful. It's raw, wild, and unpredictable, and sometimes it's downright dangerous. But I survived, and that was what mattered most. I had just turned 31, and something in me wanted to get away from everyone. I'd been living in the city for too long, work, noise, people, all of it just constantly pressing on me. I wanted space, stillness, silence. I had some saved up vacation days, and I took them without telling anyone. No post online, no goodbye texts. I wanted to disappear for a while. Not forever, just a few days. That was the plan. I picked Bitter Ridge because no one ever went there. It wasn't a known spot. It wasn't on the big hiker blogs or Instagram pages. It was dry, jagged land tucked into a fold between two larger, more popular areas. I had found it by accident years ago while looking at old forestry maps. No maintained trails, no campsites, just rough paths, sun-bleached stone, and thick brush. I knew it was remote. That's exactly what I wanted. I packed light but smart. Tent, sleeping bag, knife, fire starter, first aid, maps, food, water, a backup power bank for my phone, which I turned off to save battery, and a solar charger just in case. I brought a small hatchet too, not because I planned to use it much, but it made me feel safer. That and my Glock 19. I had a carry license and I wasn't about to go into that terrain without it. People like to talk tough about how dangerous nature is, but truth is, other people are what you really need to watch for, even in the wild. I started early on a Thursday morning, right as the sun broke. I drove my old 4Runner up into the foothills until the road narrowed into a dirt path, then kept going until even that path disappeared behind me. I parked the truck under some trees and locked everything tight. I knew it'd be fine. There was no one out here. I walked 6 miles in before I even started looking for a place to set up camp. That first day was quiet. Just the sound of my boots crunching gravel, a few birds, the occasional gust of wind. The sky stretched wide and empty over the hills. The farther I went, the more the trees thinned out, and the terrain started sloping upward into sharp rock ridges and dried-out gullies. I liked it. It was quiet in a way the city can never be. That night, I camped in a shallow dip between two low hills. I made a small fire, ate one of my pre-packed meals, then laid back against my pack and just watched the stars come out. The wind got colder after dark, but I had layers. I slept hard, only waking once when a coyote yipped somewhere far off. The second day, I pushed even farther in. I wanted to reach the spot I'd marked on my map. It was a narrow plateau halfway up a slope of broken rock and scrub. It overlooked a long stretch of the valley, and behind it, the cliffs rose up to form a high wall, a natural barrier. It felt like a dead end in the best way, like no one could sneak up behind you. I made it there by mid-afternoon. I cleared a spot, pitched my tent, set some small markers around the edges of the area in case I needed to find it fast in the dark. It was habit. I'd done solo trips before, mostly shorter ones, but I always kept small habits to feel in control. That afternoon, I spent time boiling extra water, cleaning up the small blisters on my heel, and sharpening my hatchet blade even though I hadn't used it yet. I felt calm, tired, but calm. That night is when the first strange thing happened. I had just finished eating and was sitting near the fire when I heard a sound that didn't fit. Not wildlife, not wind. It was a short, sharp scrape, like metal on rock. Close. I turned and froze. Listened. Nothing. I stayed still for a full minute. No breathing, no shifting. Just waiting. Then I slowly reached for my flashlight and swept it in a slow arc around the edge of camp. Nothing but brush, rocks, and shadows. Still, I didn't sleep right that night. I kept waking up. I didn't hear the sound again, but the feeling stayed. Like I wasn't alone anymore. The third day, I decided not to go deeper. Instead, I circled the camp in widening loops, getting a better feel for the area. I found a small cave maybe 300 yards northwest of my tent, tucked behind a thick patch of brush and half hidden by a long, flat boulder. It didn't go very deep, maybe 15 feet, but it was dry inside, cool, and felt like a good spot to sit if the wind picked up. What caught my eye, though, were the signs around it. Not signs like plastic or metal. I mean marks, boot prints, broken branches, scuffed stone. Someone had been there, maybe recently. The prints weren't mine. The treads were different, heavier, maybe hiking boots, but wider than mine. And there were multiple sets, at least 2. Not fresh, but not old either. Within the last couple of days. That bothered me. Not because other people were out here, legally anyone could be, but because I hadn't seen or heard them. No food wrappers, no fire remains, no smell of smoke, no broken trail through the brush. Just those prints near the cave. I backed away slowly and went straight back to camp. The rest of the afternoon I spent listening, just sitting near my tent, watching the ridgelines, occasionally sweeping my binoculars across the horizon. Nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night I didn't light a fire. I ate cold food, kept low, and turned in early. I had my pistol out and close. I zipped the tent up tight and kept my headlamp off. Around midnight I heard movement. Not animals. Not the soft scurry of a rabbit or the padded steps of a coyote. This was heavier, human, slow, deliberate steps on dry stone. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. They weren't trying to be quiet, which somehow made it worse. I held my breath, gripped the pistol, and waited. The sound got closer, then stopped. I couldn't tell how close, but I knew they were just beyond the tent. Maybe 20 feet, then nothing. I waited for an hour, maybe more. No footsteps away, no more movement. Eventually, I fell asleep sitting up, gun still in hand. In the morning, I found prints. Same boot tread as the cave. A big man, maybe 2. They had walked right up to the edge of camp, paused, then walked off to the south. No sign of them doubling back. I packed up that morning. I didn't want to panic, but something wasn't right. This wasn't someone lost or passing through. They had stood there for too long, too quietly, watching. I kept my pack tight, everything ready. I didn't run, just walked fast and quiet, staying off open areas. I figured if I could get back to the truck before dark, I'd drive out and just be done with it. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. About 3 hours into the hike back, I found something I hadn't seen on the way in. A shirt, caught on a branch. Faded blue, torn badly at one sleeve. A few feet away, part of a backpack strap. Cut. Then, farther down the slope, a boot. Still laced. Still standing upright. I didn't go down to check it. I didn't want to know. I took out my phone and turned it on. No signal. I tried sending a location ping anyway, just in case. Then I moved. The rest of that day was a blur of fast walking, checking behind me every few minutes, and forcing myself to keep moving even though I was getting tired and overheated. I made it back to the Forerunner just before dusk, but something was off. The driver's side mirror was folded in. I knew I hadn't done that. I always leave it out so I can spot it from a distance. When I got closer, I saw scratches along the door. Not deep, but intentional, like someone had scraped a knife along the paint. I unlocked the door, checked inside. Nothing stolen. Nothing moved, but the glove box was open. I keep a backup key in there. It was gone. My chest went cold. Someone had opened it, taken the spare, and closed it back like nothing had happened. I started the truck with my main key, turned over fine. Gas was still half full. I drove, fast. For the first few miles, I checked the rear view constantly. Every shadow on the trees made me flinch. Every bump in the road sounded wrong. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway. At the first gas station I found, I parked under the lights, locked all the doors, and finally let myself breathe. I checked the truck all over. No tracker I could see, but I knew how easy it would be to hide a small GPS tag under the bumper or behind the trim. I didn't know what kind of people were out there, but they weren't just campers. They had stood near my tent at night. They had taken my spare key. Maybe they wanted the truck. Maybe they just wanted to scare me. Or worse, I drove straight home, not stopping again. When I got back to the city, I swapped out the truck's locks, tossed the spare key entirely, and made a report to the local police. Not about the people, but about the missing hiker gear I saw. They took notes but didn't seem too concerned. Just told me it happens sometimes. People get lost. I didn't tell them everything. I didn't want to sound crazy. For weeks, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see those boot prints around my tent. I'd hear that crunch of footsteps in the dark. I'd been meaning to get away from the city for a while. Work was draining me out, and the noise of traffic, phones ringing, and just people everywhere. It had gotten to the point where I couldn't think straight anymore. My head felt like a balloon with too much air. Every little thing annoyed me. I was tired all the time. I couldn't focus. I knew I needed a break, a proper one, not a weekend in front of a TV. I wanted silence, cold air, a fire, trees. Just me and nothing else. So I decided to go camping. Not the type where you pull up to a well-lit campsite with picnic tables and loud families grilling sausages. I didn't want any of that. I wanted something deeper, quieter, real solitude. I spent a couple of days looking at topographic maps, Google Earth, backwoods camping forums. I picked a location up north, not too far from where the paved road ends. From there, it was supposed to be a 14-kilometer dirt road into a state-managed forest area, with an old trail leading into an unused firewatch clearing by a lake. I wasn't even sure if the tower was still there, but I didn't care. If there was flat ground and water, that was enough for me. I packed everything carefully. I double-checked my gear: tent, thermal sleeping bag, hatchet, stove, extra batteries, first aid kit, GPS unit, satellite phone, bear spray, food for 5 days, water filtration system, everything. I wasn't new to this. I'd gone solo before, but something about this trip made me more careful than usual. Maybe it was the fact that the road didn't even show up properly on most apps. I left early in the morning. The drive took about 5 hours, the last stretch being mostly rural highway. When I turned off onto the dirt road, it was around 1 p.m. The road wasn't great. A lot of potholes, narrow in places, grass growing in the middle. Definitely hadn't seen regular traffic in years. I went slowly. My SUV could handle it, but still, I didn't want to pop a tire out there. No cell signal since about 30 minutes back. I didn't pass a single car going in or coming out. After maybe an hour of crawling up that road, I reached the spot where I was supposed to park. It wasn't marked, just a widened area with gravel that looked like it had once been a turnaround spot for trucks. The forest was thick around me, quiet. No wind, no birds. I killed the engine, stepped out, and listened. The silence was so full, it almost rang in my ears. I locked the car, threw on my pack, and started up the trail. It was overgrown, but I could still follow it. It snaked up a gentle incline for a few kilometers. I walked steadily, not in a hurry. Felt good. The further I got from the road, the better I felt. Like I was leaving the weight of my life behind with every step. The trees closed in thick around me, and the sounds of the city finally disappeared from my memory. I reached the lake just as the sun began to shift toward late afternoon. It was small, still, and black like glass. I stood there for a while, just taking it in. Across the water, half hidden behind some trees, I saw the rusted legs of the old Firewatch tower. The top was gone, probably collapsed, but the base was still there. Around it, an open area, mostly flat and dry. I decided that was my spot. I set up camp quickly, pitched the tent, filtered water, gathered wood, ate something simple. It was dead quiet, the kind of quiet you only get when you're truly alone. No planes overhead, no distant hum of cars, no dogs barking, just wind, birds, and the occasional groan of old trees. I sat by the fire as the sky turned purple, then black. Stars came out, clean and sharp. I felt small in a good way. My head was finally quiet. That night I slept deep. No dreams, just cold air and the soft rustling of the trees. The second day passed peacefully. I hiked around the lake, followed a game trail uphill until I got a view of the forest stretching for miles in every direction. I saw deer tracks, maybe a coyote's, nothing unusual. I felt clear-headed for the first time in months. I ate better. I stretched. I read a little. I wrote in my journal. I barely thought about work. I kept the fire going longer that night just because I enjoyed watching it. When I finally went into the tent, I fell asleep easily again. It was the third day things changed. Started small. I woke up and noticed something odd. My boots had been moved. Not far, just slightly off from where I'd left them. At first, I thought maybe I had just kicked them in my sleep getting in and out of the tent. But they were neatly placed side by side, facing a different direction. Felt wrong. Too deliberate. I looked around. Nothing else seemed disturbed. No animal tracks. No trash dragged out. Just the boots. Still, I shook it off. Told myself maybe I was overthinking it. Later that morning, I went out to collect more firewood. I went deeper into the trees than usual, following a fallen log line where I'd seen dry branches. As I bent down to break a limb, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. A small candy wrapper, faded, torn at the edge, blue and silver. I don't eat candy like that. I hadn't brought any, and it wasn't old enough to have been there for years. It looked recent. I crouched there staring at it for a while, then looked around slowly. Nothing. Just trees. I pocketed the wrapper and walked back to camp, slower than usual. Every few steps, I stopped and listened. The forest felt different. The silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt heavy, like something was holding its breath. I checked the perimeter of the camp, looked for tracks. I found nothing. The fire pit was untouched. My food was hung up properly in a bear bag. The tent was closed. Nothing obviously wrong, but something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night, I barely slept. I kept waking up, sure I'd heard something outside. Footsteps, twigs snapping, breathing maybe, but every time I unzipped the tent and looked, there was nothing there, just cold air and shadows. I sat up for hours listening. Eventually, around 4 a.m., I drifted into a light sleep. In the morning, I found more signs. A stick placed upright in the dirt near the fire pit. Not leaning, not fallen. Planted. Just a straight piece of wood, stuck in like a marker. No reason for it to be there. I hadn't done that. No wind could do it. The ground was firm. It hadn't rained. Again, I looked for tracks. Nothing. Not even disturbed leaves. I started getting nervous. Not panic, not yet. But my mind was turning over possibilities. Maybe a hunter? Someone else camping nearby? But I hadn't seen anyone. No cars. No signs. Nothing. And hunters don't sneak around and plant sticks in people's camps. I considered packing up and leaving early. But part of me wanted to stick it out. I told myself I was being paranoid. That I'd wanted isolation. Well, here it was. And maybe my brain was just playing tricks on me. I tried to brush it off. That day, I stayed close to camp. Kept the fire going all afternoon. Tried to stay busy. But my ears were always open, listening. Every creak, every rustle made my head snap around. At one point, I thought I saw movement behind the trees across the lake. Just a quick shift, like someone ducking down. I stared at the spot for 10 minutes straight. Nothing moved again. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat up by the fire, wrapped in my jacket, gripping the hatchet in my lap. I didn't even try to go in the tent. The woods felt alive in the worst way. I didn't hear animals. I heard quiet footsteps, crunches that stopped when I moved. A branch cracked to my left at one point, maybe 15 feet from the firelight. I stood, heart pounding, staring into the dark, and waited. I didn't call out. I didn't want to say a word. Nothing answered. Nothing moved. By sunrise, I had made up my mind. I was leaving. I packed quickly, stuffed everything into my pack. Didn't eat, didn't filter water. Just filled one bottle, packed the tent half folded, and got moving. I didn't want to be there another hour. I hiked fast. The trail was rougher than I remembered. More overgrowth. Branches felt like they reached out more. I kept hearing things. Small noises behind me. I stopped several times and waited, but nothing ever came into view. Then, about a kilometer from where I'd parked, I found something that made my blood run cold. A set of footprints. In the mud. Not mine. Bigger than mine. Deep, fresh. Leading off the trail, then back onto it. A full circle. Someone had been following the trail in both directions. Not a bear. Not boots like mine. Different tread. Worn down. I took a photo with my phone, though I knew there was no signal. I didn't run. I wanted to, but I kept walking, fast and steady, gripping the bear spray in my hand. Every sound behind me sounded like it was getting closer. When I finally saw my car through the trees, It started as a simple trip, just me alone in the woods. I wanted to get away from the noise of the city and clear my head. I'd been stressed out with work, deadlines, and all the usual stuff that piles up and makes everything feel heavy. The plan was to go somewhere quiet, set up camp for a few days, and just live off the land for a bit. No distractions, no phone signal, nothing but the trees, the sky, and the silence. That's what I thought I needed. I packed light but carefully. A good tent, a sleeping bag, a small stove, some basic food, mostly canned beans and dried meat, plus water, a first aid kit, and a few survival tools. I also took my hiking boots, a flashlight with extra batteries, and a pocket knife. The forest I chose wasn't famous or anything, just a stretch of national forest land about 3 hours from my apartment. Not a well-known spot, which was exactly why I picked it. I wanted solitude. The drive was long but peaceful. As I got closer, the paved road gave way to gravel, then to dirt. The trees thickened, tall pines mostly, with some maples and birches scattered around. When I finally parked the car near a trailhead, I took a deep breath and started hiking in. I wanted to find a clearing by a creek I'd seen on the map, a spot that looked like it might be good for camping and close to water. The hike was tougher than I expected. The path was narrow and overgrown in places, with roots and rocks sticking out everywhere. I moved slowly, careful with every step so I wouldn't twist an ankle. The sun was getting lower, the light filtering through the trees in long golden beams that made everything look warm and calm. Birds chirped somewhere far above, and a soft wind rustled the leaves. Felt like a different world out here. After a couple of hours, I found the spot I wanted. It was a small clearing by the creek, surrounded by tall trees that blocked the wind but let in enough light to keep the place from feeling too dark. The creek water was clear and cold, flowing over smooth stones with a steady, soothing sound. I dropped my backpack, stretched, and started setting up the tent. I took my time with everything. I picked a flat spot, cleared away some leaves and twigs, and pitched the tent. Then I gathered some dry wood and started a small fire. The first night was calm. I ate a simple dinner, warmed by the fire's light. The stars came out, bright and countless, like I'd never seen in the city. I felt good, almost peaceful. But as the night deepened, the quiet started to feel different. It wasn't just peaceful anymore. It was heavy, almost too heavy. I could hear the creak, the wind in the trees, the occasional snap of a twig somewhere far off. But it wasn't the sounds themselves, it was the way they filled the dark, like something was just beyond the edge of the firelight, watching. I tried not to think about it and went to sleep. Morning came with a cold, damp mist hanging low in the trees. I packed up some things and went to refill my water bottle at the creek. The air was sharp and fresh. The forest looked different in the daylight. Less mysterious, more solid and real. Still, I had the feeling something was off. I shrugged it off as just my imagination. Over the next day, I explored a bit more, moving deeper into the woods. I marked my path carefully with small piles of stones and broken branches so I wouldn't get lost. The forest was dense, filled with tall trees that blocked most of the sky. The ground was thick with pine needles, moss, and fallen leaves. Occasionally, I spotted animal tracks, deer, rabbits, maybe a fox. No bears, which was a relief. I found a few berry bushes and picked some to eat. The fruit was tart but fresh. I kept my knife handy and moved cautiously. I stayed aware of the sounds, the rustling, the distant calls of birds, the wind moving through the canopy. It was beautiful but tense at the same time. That night, back at camp, the feeling came back stronger. When the sun set, the forest seemed to close in. Shadows stretched and twisted beyond the firelight. The noises grew sharper, branches cracking, leaves crunching, something heavy moving through the brush. But I couldn't see anything. My flashlight was ready, but I didn't want to waste the batteries unless I really needed them. I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself it was just the forest doing its thing. Animals moving, wind shifting, maybe some deer or raccoons passing by. But then I heard it. A low, heavy sound, like something dragging itself through the undergrowth. It wasn't quick or light, it was slow, deliberate. And it was close, closer than I wanted. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the trees around the clearing. Nothing, just dark trunks and shifting leaves. My heart was pounding. The fire flickered in the breeze. The noise stopped. I told myself to sit still, wait it out. The forest would quiet down soon. But then came another sound, a soft crunching, like someone or something stepping on dry twigs right outside the circle of firelight. I turned the flashlight beam toward the sound again, but it was gone. For a long time, I just sat there, staring into the dark. The fire was my only barrier against whatever was out there. I thought about packing up and leaving, but the thought of hiking in the dark terrified me more. So I stayed put, listening to the forest and waiting for the sunrise. Morning didn't come soon enough. When it finally did, the first light revealed a lot more. I saw the prints around the camp, large, heavy footprints in the soft earth near the edge of the clearing. They weren't human. They were big, wider, and longer than any foot I knew. The toes were rounded and spaced apart, and the heel was broad. The print looked fresh, maybe from just before I woke up. I looked around carefully for other signs. There were broken branches at the edge of the clearing, bent grass, and crushed bushes. Whatever had been there, it had moved slowly but surely around the perimeter. It hadn't come into the firelight circle, but it had been close enough to touch. The realization hit me hard. I was not alone. Something large and wild had been watching me all night, and it wasn't afraid of me. I packed my things quickly, trying to stay calm. The creek water tasted cold and fresh as I filled my bottles again. I wanted to leave this place fast. I started hiking back toward the car. I kept my eyes open for the footprints, hoping to follow them and see if they led anywhere. But the path was getting muddled with my own steps, and the forest floor was covered with dry leaves and needles. It was hard to track anything clearly. Then, about an hour into the hike, I heard it again. That heavy, slow noise in the brush, like something big was moving through the trees, but not rushing, more like stalking. I stopped immediately and stood still. The forest was quiet except for the sound of that movement. I turned slowly in a circle with my flashlight, shining it through the trees, but I didn't see a thing. My heart was racing. I wanted to run, but I knew if I made a lot of noise, it might draw whatever was closer. So I walked carefully, faster but silent, trying to keep the noise of my own steps minimal. The forest seemed to close in around me. The trees stood tall and unmoving, the branches casting strange shapes on the ground. The sun filtered through in scattered rays, but the shadows were deep. After a while, I started to hear more signs. Broken twigs snapping, leaves crunching underfoot, and the occasional heavy breath that didn't sound like mine. My skin prickled. I was being followed. I didn't look back again. My mind raced. What could it be? A bear? A mountain lion? Something else? The forest floor began to slope downhill. I knew the parking area was near a clearing at the bottom. I pushed myself harder, not daring to slow down. Suddenly, I tripped over a root and fell hard. My knee scraped against the rough bark and dirt. Pain shot through my leg, but I didn't have time to think about it. I scrambled to my feet and kept moving, the noise behind me getting louder. I could hear branches snapping closer now. Whatever it was gaining on me. Then I heard the breath, deep, heavy, close behind. The air was thick with tension. I broke into a full run, stumbling down the hill toward the clearing. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. The pain in my knee was ignored completely as I sprinted with everything I had. Then, suddenly, the trees opened up, and I saw the gravel road and the parked car in the distance. I shouted, though no one was around to hear me. I ran harder. Just as I reached the edge of the clearing, I glanced back and saw it. A massive black shape moving fast through the trees, breaking branches, huge and powerful. A bear. It was a black bear, easily the size of a small car. It hadn't charged me, but it was chasing me, probably curious or maybe feeling threatened. I slammed the car door behind me, locked it quickly, and started the engine. The bear stopped at the tree line, growling low but not coming any closer. I sat there shaking, the engine running, watching the bear until it disappeared back into the forest. After a few minutes, I finally breathed out and drove away. I didn't stop until I was back on the highway, surrounded by streetlights and cars. The safety of civilization felt like a heavy relief. I had never been someone who feared the outdoors. If anything, I always looked forward to getting away from the noise of town, the constant pressure of work, and the monotony of the same roads and faces every day. For me, the forest was a reset button. It stripped everything down to the essentials. Just you, your gear, and the quiet. That kind of peace is hard to find anywhere else. It was early November when I decided to go on a solo camping trip. I didn't tell many people because I didn't think it was a big deal. I had done trips like this before. I always packed right, planned right, and gave myself time to get back before dark on the last day. That weekend, I had chosen a place called Rikers Hollow, about 3 hours out from where I lived. It wasn't a popular spot, which I liked. It wasn't completely off the grid, but it didn't have cell service, and you wouldn't run into many hikers unless it was summer. I left home on a Friday morning. My pack was heavy but manageable. I had my tent, a good sleeping bag, stove, 2 days worth of food, a knife, a flashlight with extra batteries, a water filter, a paper map, and even a flare just in case. I also had my old journal and a pen I kept tucked in the outer pouch. I hadn't written in it for months, but sometimes I liked to scribble notes when I was out there. Maybe it made me feel less alone. The drive out was quiet. The roads grew narrower and less maintained the closer I got to the trailhead. Eventually, I reached a small gravel area where the dirt path started. There was only one other car parked there, a red SUV. That comforted me a little. At least someone else was nearby, even if I never saw them. I locked my car, slung the pack over my shoulders, and started walking into the trees. The trail was covered in orange and brown leaves, soft underfoot, and the wind kept rustling through the high branches like waves passing overhead. After about an hour of walking, I reached a narrow creek and followed it upstream. The water was clear and cold, running over rocks and fallen branches. Eventually, I veered off trail and found a small clearing that was flat enough to pitch my tent. It was surrounded on 3 sides by tall trees and had just enough of an opening to see the sky. I could hear the creek not too far off, which I liked. Running water always helped me sleep. I set up the tent, gathered some firewood, and boiled water for a late lunch. Time passed slowly out there. Without a phone or anyone to talk to, you start to notice every sound, every movement. Squirrels darting across branches, the distant drumming of a woodpecker, the way the light changes when a cloud drifts overhead. It's like your brain switches to a different mode. At some point that afternoon, I sat on a flat rock and scribbled a few lines in my journal about how still everything felt. That first night was uneventful. I had a fire going before sunset, made some soup, and then crawled into my sleeping bag before the temperature dropped too low. The wind picked up a bit, but I was used to that. Leaves rattling, branches creaking. It was normal forest noise. I remember waking up around 3 a.m. needing to pee, so I stepped out of the tent with my flashlight. The air was freezing, and my breath came out in clouds. I walked a little ways from the tent, did my business, and just stood there for a minute with the light off. It was pitch dark, but incredibly quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, more like the absence of anything at all. I realized then that I hadn't heard a single animal sound since I stepped out. No owls, no rustling, nothing. Just my own breath and the distant whisper of the creek. I stood there for another second, then shook it off, walked back to the tent, and zipped myself in. I told myself maybe I just happened to catch a quiet moment. The next morning, I made coffee and oatmeal, packed a small day bag, and decided to follow the creek farther upstream to explore a bit. I brought my filter bottle in case I needed water. The ground was soft in places, and I nearly slipped more than once. After about 2 hours of hiking, I noticed something strange. A series of boot prints near the edge of the water. They were faint but definitely there. They weren't mine. These were deeper, wider, and more spaced out, like someone with a longer stride. I figured they must have belonged to the person with the red SUV. It made sense, they probably came out this way too. I kept following the prints, but after a while they veered off sharply into the woods. I stopped. It didn't feel right to follow them anymore. There was something about the way they changed direction. Suddenly, like the person had heard or seen something and bolted into the trees. I turned around and headed back toward my campsite. When I got back, everything was just as I left it. Tent standing, gear untouched. I sat on a log, poured some water into my pot to boil, and pulled out my knife to slice a granola bar. As I cut into the wrapper, I noticed something odd on the blade, like dried sap or something sticky. I didn't remember cutting anything the day before that could have caused it. It was probably just old resin from firewood, I told myself, and wiped it off with a cloth. That night, it was colder. I could feel the chill cutting through my sleeping bag, and I put on an extra pair of socks before I crawled in. Around midnight, I thought I heard a sound just outside the tent. Not an animal, though. It was subtle, like someone had stepped on dry leaves and tried not to. I held my breath and waited. The sound didn't repeat. I slowly reached for the flashlight and clicked it on. I unzipped the tent just enough to poke my head out. The light swept across the clearing. Nothing. I turned it off and just listened. Still nothing. After a while, I zipped the flap closed and lay back down. But I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I felt worn out and uneasy. I decided I'd pack up and hike back to the car. I had planned to stay one more night, but something just didn't feel right. I made coffee, skipped breakfast, and broke down the tent as fast as I could without rushing it so much that I forgot anything. As I was rolling up the tent poles, I noticed something near the edge of the clearing, maybe 10 feet into the trees. A piece of fabric caught on a branch. I walked over and pulled it loose. It was a torn piece of red flannel, like from a shirt or jacket. The edges were frayed, and it was damp from the morning dew. I turned around and looked back at my gear, then scanned the trees again. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt like I was being watched. I packed up everything and started walking back down the trail, moving quicker than before. The forest felt different that day, too quiet again. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't take any side paths. I kept looking behind me every few minutes, just to be sure. I reached the trailhead in the early afternoon, but something made my stomach twist the moment I saw my car. The red SUV was gone. That wasn't the problem, though. The problem was the muddy footprints around my car. Someone had walked around it. Not just once, many times. The prints circled the car, overlapped, went back and forth between the driver's side and the trunk. I stood frozen, just staring. I unlocked the door, tossed my pack into the back, and checked the front seat. Everything was there: wallet, keys, phone. Nothing stolen, but something was off. I slammed the door, got in, and drove away as fast as that gravel road would let me. On the drive back, I couldn't stop thinking about the footprints, the flannel cloth, the sound in the night. I thought maybe I should report it, but what would I say? That someone walked around my car? That I heard a sound? That I found a piece of torn fabric? None of that was a crime. None of that proved anything. I didn't even know if something bad had happened, but I couldn't let it go. 3 days later, I called the local ranger station. I told them I had seen some strange boot prints and found a torn piece of clothing out at Rikers Hollow. The guy on the phone was polite but brief, said they'd look into it. That was it. I left it there, even though I kept thinking about it every day. 2 weeks later, I saw a news story online. A body had been found out near the Rikers Hollow area. A hunter had discovered it partially buried under a pile of leaves and brush. No ID, but they mentioned a red flannel shirt. They suspected foul play. That's all the article said. I read the story 3 times. I kept thinking about that red SUV, about the boot prints that veered off the creek path, about the footprints around my car, and that sound outside my tent. Whoever that was, whoever had circled my vehicle, had likely been watching me. Maybe from the trees, maybe all night, maybe even during the day when I was gone exploring upstream. They never took anything, never tried to confront me, but they were there. I haven't gone camping since. I still have my gear packed neatly in the garage, but every time I look at it, something tightens in my chest. I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear leaves crunching outside my window. I still remember how quiet that forest was, like it was holding its breath. I know now that being alone in the woods is different than being lonely. There's a kind of danger out there that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't roar or growl or leave tracks you can follow. It just waits and watches. I had been planning that camping trip for a long time. I wanted to get away from everything. My phone, the noise, people, work, and all the usual stuff that just keeps piling up every day. I was tired of being inside, tired of staring at screens, and honestly, just tired of everything. So, when the opportunity came up and I had 4 days off in a row, I didn't even hesitate. I packed up my gear, filled my cooler with food, tossed a couple gallons of water in the back, and drove out early one morning toward a place I hadn't been to before. An area about 3 hours from home, in the mountains, mostly forest, with barely any cell service and no nearby towns. I had found it while scrolling through random forums online. It was described as remote, quiet, and lightly trafficked. That was exactly what I wanted. The spot I picked was just off a small forest service road. You wouldn't find it unless you were looking. The road wasn't maintained well. It was all gravel, with potholes big enough to pop a tire if you weren't careful. It twisted and climbed for miles into dense woods, and the higher I went, the quieter it got. The sound of the engine was pretty much the only thing I could hear after a while. Trees lined both sides of the road so close they looked like they were swallowing the trail whole. It was exactly the kind of place I had hoped for. No people, no noise, just nature. After about an hour on that rough road, I pulled off onto a small clearing that looked like it had been used before. There were some old fire rings made from rocks, a flat area where a tent could go, and a bit of space to turn my vehicle around. I shut off the engine, stepped out, and for the first time in weeks, I actually felt relaxed. There was a soft wind moving through the trees, birds calling in the distance, and the smell of pine and dirt in the air. The only thing I could hear besides that was the sound of my boots crunching the dry leaves beneath me. I set up my tent, unpacked my cooler, and started gathering some wood for a small fire. It was mid-afternoon by then, and I still had hours before dark. I wasn't planning on doing much that first day, just get everything set up, eat something simple, and maybe go for a walk before the sun went down. I remember thinking that I'd finally done something right. The stress was already peeling off me. The first night went by without anything unusual. I sat by the fire for a while, ate a sandwich, and stared at the stars for what felt like forever. They were so bright out there, far from the city lights. It was quiet too, the kind of quiet that feels like a blanket over everything. You could hear every twig snap, every rustle in the brush. At one point, I heard something moving through the trees a few yards away, but I figured it was probably a deer or maybe a raccoon. I didn't even check. I was too tired, and honestly, I didn't care. I had bear spray, a knife, and an axe close by. I wasn't worried. When I woke up the next morning, I felt good. I made some instant coffee, ate a couple granola bars, and sat on a log watching the sun come through the trees. I had no plans for the day other than hiking a bit and exploring the area. There was a trailhead about a quarter mile from where I'd set up camp, marked with faded orange tape tied to tree branches. I followed it, walking slowly, looking at the plants and trees, listening to the sounds around me. After about 2 hours of walking, I came across a small stream. The water was clean, cold, and clear. I refilled my bottle, rested for a bit, and turned around to head back. It was on the walk back that I noticed something a little strange. I saw what looked like a tarp, blue and old, crumpled in the brush maybe 50 feet off the trail. At first, I thought it might have been part of an old hunting camp or maybe trash someone had left behind. I stepped off the trail and moved toward it. The closer I got, the more I could see it wasn't just a tarp, but the remains of a campsite. There was a rusty pot, a broken folding chair, and an old fire ring. Everything looked like it had been left there for years. Moss was growing on the chair's legs. The fire ring had small plants growing between the stones. I didn't think much of it at first. People leave things behind sometimes. But then I noticed something else, boot prints. Not fresh, but not old either. The kind you can still see the tread pattern in. And not just one pair, at least 2 sets. They were going in different directions, like someone had walked around the site several times. I didn't feel threatened, but something about it made me uneasy, like I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to. I didn't stay long. I turned back to the main trail, got back to my camp, and tried to shake the weird feeling. The rest of the day was uneventful. I ate dinner early, kept the fire going for a bit, and turned in when it got dark. But I didn't sleep that well. Every time the wind picked up or I heard leaves rustling, I opened my eyes. I kept thinking about those boot prints. On the 3rd day, I woke up early. I didn't want to sit around the camp anymore. I packed a small bag and decided to hike deeper into the forest. I didn't plan to go too far, just enough to get away from that feeling that had started to creep in. About a mile out, I found a ridge that overlooked a wide valley below. I sat there for a long time just watching. It was peaceful again. That feeling of being watched or followed was gone for a while. It was only on the way back that things started to get strange again. I noticed something odd along the trail. A small bundle of sticks arranged in a triangle, tied together with what looked like fishing line or thread. It was sitting right in the middle of the path. I stopped and stared at it for a while. I even crouched down and looked at the knots. Someone had taken time to tie them carefully, almost like they knew what they were doing. It wasn't the kind of thing that just falls together by chance. I didn't touch it. I just stepped over it and kept walking. But it stayed in my mind the whole way back. When I got back to my camp, I found something I wasn't expecting. The small pile of firewood I had stacked near the ring was scattered, like someone had kicked through it or picked it up and dropped it. One of the water jugs I had sitting near the tree line was tipped over, even though I remembered setting it on level ground. My folding chair had been moved a few feet, now facing the opposite direction. At first, I tried to reason through it. Maybe an animal came through, raccoons, maybe a black bear. But there were no claw marks, no torn bags, nothing broken. It felt more like someone had been there, someone who walked on 2 feet and had hands. I spent that night with my knife under my sleeping bag. I didn't light a fire. I didn't cook anything. I stayed completely silent, listening to the forest outside. Every snap of a twig made my heart pound. Every gust of wind felt like it was carrying something with it. I didn't sleep much. I must have laid there for hours just staring at the dark ceiling of my tent. Around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. They weren't fast or frantic. They were controlled. Someone or something was walking just outside the tent, maybe 10 feet away. I held my breath. My fingers were wrapped tight around the handle of the knife, and I didn't move. I could hear the steps stop near the tree where I had left my water jugs. Then nothing. Total silence for a long time. I didn't get up. I didn't even unzip the tent. I stayed like that until the first light started breaking through the fabric. When the sun came up, I stepped out slowly. My gear was untouched. The chair was where I had left it. The water jugs were standing upright again. No tracks. No sign that anyone had been there. Felt like a dream, but I knew it wasn't. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I wasn't alone. I decided right then that I wasn't staying another night. I packed everything up quickly. I didn't even eat breakfast. I just shoved things into bags, folded the tent, and loaded the truck. I was sweating, even though it was a cool morning, and my hands were shaking the whole time. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone watching me from the trees. As I was backing out of the clearing, I saw something that stopped me cold. In the middle of the trail leading back to the main road, someone had stacked stones. 3 of them, balanced carefully, one on top of the other. The bottom one was big, the kind you'd need both hands to lift. The top one was small and sharp, like a little pyramid. There was no way it had just happened on its own. It hadn't been there when I came in. I didn't get out. I drove around it slowly, the tires crunching the edge of the brush. And then I drove straight down the mountain, not stopping until I hit pavement. Even then, I didn't feel safe until I was an hour away. I pulled into a gas station, filled up the tank, and just sat in the truck for a while. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post anything. I didn't even tell anyone about the trip. That was over a year ago, and I haven't gone camping since. I've thought about it. I've even packed my bag once or twice. But something always stops me. Not because I'm scared of bears or bad weather. I'm scared of people. People who are out there, deep in the woods, where no one can hear you. People who don't want to be found, who watch from the trees, who move your things when you're not looking, who leave signs behind just to let you know they're there. And the worst part, you never actually see them. It was the second week of August when I decided to take a break from everything and go on a solo camping trip. I had been working straight for months. Long shifts, late nights, deadlines stacking up, and I just needed to be away from people, traffic, phones, and screens. I didn't want anything complicated, just trees, sky, and quiet. I picked a location that wasn't too far from home but was still off the beaten path. It was a little pocket of woods about an hour and a half outside the city. Not a national park or anything, just public forest land near an old logging trail that barely anyone used anymore. I'd been there once before with a friend years ago, and I remembered it as peaceful, isolated, and dense with trees that muffled every sound except the ones right around you. That's what I wanted, complete silence and distance. I packed my gear a day early so I wouldn't forget anything. I double-checked my tent, sleeping bag, portable stove, headlamp, water filter, and food for at least 3 days. I brought enough fuel, a backup power bank, a knife, a compass, a small first aid kit, a fire starter, and 2 flashlights just in case. I wasn't expecting anything to go wrong, but I've always been cautious. I also packed a can of bear spray and a loud whistle I never really used but always carried. I left early the next morning around 6:30, before the sun was all the way up. The drive was calm. No traffic, barely any cars, and I stopped once at a small gas station to top off the tank and grab some snacks. After another hour, the paved road turned into gravel, and after a few more miles it narrowed into a thin dirt trail wide enough for just one car at a time. It hadn't been maintained in years. Grass and weeds grew up the middle, scraping at the undercarriage as I drove. The forest grew thicker the deeper I went. Trees leaned close overhead, forming a kind of tunnel through the woods. I passed a rusted-out metal gate that had fallen sideways into the grass. The paint almost completely flaked off. That was the unofficial marker. Beyond it, the trail got rough and the trees were older and denser. I drove maybe another mile before pulling off into a clearing just large enough to turn my car around. From there, it was all on foot. I slung on my pack and locked the car, triple-checked the doors out of habit, then hiked in. The trail was overgrown but still passable. Thorns tugged at my sleeves and tiny bugs clung to the sweat on my arms. The air smelled sharp, dry pine, warm moss, and distant water. It took me about 40 minutes of steady walking to reach the spot I remembered. A small rise just above a gentle slope, thick with spruce trees and old rocks, where the ground was level and covered in a soft bed of pine needles. There was a shallow creek maybe 50 yards downhill, and I could hear the faint trickle of it through the brush. I took a moment to just stand still, listen, and feel the quiet. I set up camp slowly. First, the tent. I cleared the ground of twigs and stones, laid down a tarp, then pitched my 2-person tent. Then I rolled out my sleeping bag, set up my small foldable chair, and lit the stove to make a cup of instant coffee. I had cell service for a few minutes when I first got there. 1 bar, blinking on and off, but I switched my phone to airplane mode anyway. That was the point. No distractions. Just me, the woods, and time that didn't feel like it was slipping away. That first day was uneventful in the best way. I sat for hours just listening to the birds and wind. I read half a book, wrote a few pages in a small notebook I brought, and took a nap under the trees. I made a simple dinner, beans, rice, and sausage, and sat by the fire until it burned down low. There were no trails nearby, no people, no planes overhead. Just darkness, stars, and forest all around me. I slept better than I had in weeks. The second day was still quiet, but had a different kind of stillness. I woke early, just after sunrise, and noticed that it felt slightly cooler than it had the day before. The air smelled more damp, and the sky was cloudy, thick with low gray clouds that didn't move much. I figured it might rain, so I secured the tarp over the firewood and tied the corners of my rainfly tighter. I filled my water bottle from the creek, filtered it, and made oatmeal with dried fruit. Around mid-morning, I took a short hike farther into the woods, just wandering without any set direction. I followed the creek uphill until it turned into a thinner trickle, then looped back toward camp in a wide arc. On the way back, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: a set of small, shallow tire tracks. Not car tracks, but from some kind of small off-road vehicle. They were faint, like they hadn't been used recently, but they ran across a patch of dirt maybe 200 feet from my tent, in a direction I hadn't come from. They didn't look new, but they also didn't look ancient. Caught me off guard a little, because I hadn't seen any signs of other people nearby. No voices, no trash, no paths. I stared at them for a while and then moved on. I told myself they were probably left over from years ago, maybe hunters or loggers. Still, it stayed in the back of my mind. That night, it started raining lightly just after sundown. The sound of it hitting the tent was peaceful, steady. I listened to it for a long time before falling asleep. Sometime during the night, I woke up feeling like something had changed. The rain was still falling, but I couldn't hear the creek anymore. I don't mean that it had dried up or anything, but the sound of water moving had just stopped reaching me. I opened the tent flap and looked out. It was dark, really dark. The kind of pitch black where you can't see your hand in front of your face. I clicked on my headlamp and scanned the trees. Everything looked normal. Wet leaves, raindrops on the tent fly, mist in the air. But I couldn't shake that feeling, that pressure in the chest like you've just been caught staring at something you shouldn't. I zipped the flap shut and forced myself to go back to sleep. The third day was when everything started to go wrong. It was early morning again when I woke up. The rain had stopped, and the sky was brighter, though still cloudy. The forest looked pale and washed out from the rain. I stepped out of the tent to stretch and felt a kind of stillness that was different from the other days. Not calm, empty. The birds weren't making any noise. No rustling, no buzzing. It was dead quiet. I tried to ignore it. I boiled water, made coffee, then walked to the edge of the creek again. That's when I saw it. Across the shallow water, on the far side of the creek, about 15 or 20 feet away, there was something hanging from a tree. It was small, grayish-brown, and swinging just slightly from side to side. At first I thought it was a dead bird or a clump of wet moss, but when I looked closer, I saw it was a small animal, maybe a rabbit, tied by its back legs with a thin piece of wire suspended from a low branch. It looked like it had been there a while. Its fur was soaked and matted, and its body was stiff, like it had dried into that shape. The worst part was the way it had been hung. Not randomly, but carefully. The wire was thin and shiny, wrapped tight, and the knot was clean. Not the kind of thing you'd find by accident. Someone had put it there. I just stood there for a long time, staring at it. It didn't make sense. No predator would hang a dead rabbit like that. It wasn't scavenged, either. No signs of teeth or claws. It looked more like a warning or a message. My first thought was that maybe some kids had come out here messing around. But the tracks I saw the day before flashed back into my head. The faint tire marks. The way the creek had gone quiet the night before. The pressure in my chest returned, stronger this time. I stepped back slowly, keeping my eyes on the trees around me, then turned and walked quickly back to camp. I started packing up. I didn't even eat breakfast. I broke down the tent, stuffed everything into my pack, doused the fire ring just in case, and got ready to hike out. I didn't hear anything behind me, but I kept turning around, scanning the trees every few steps. The forest still felt off. No wind, no noise, nothing. I made it back to the car in under 30 minutes, twice as fast as it had taken to hike in, and slammed the door shut the second I climbed in. I sat there, breathing hard, waiting to feel normal again. But I didn't. Something about the air still felt wrong. I turned the key. The engine didn't start. Clicked once, then nothing. I sat there stunned. Tried again. Just a single click. I turned everything off, waited, and tried a third time. Nothing. The battery wasn't dead. I had lights, the dashboard lit up, but the starter just wouldn't turn. I'd never had problems with this car before. It wasn't old. I kept it in good shape. And now, in the middle of nowhere, it just decided to fail. Panic started to build slowly, like a slow pressure in my throat. I popped the hood and checked what I could. Connections, battery cables, nothing obvious was loose. I wasn't a mechanic, but even I knew this didn't make any sense. It had been fine 3 days ago. I tried one more time. Nothing. Just that single click. I looked around. The trail was dead silent. No birds, no insects, just stillness. I felt like I was being watched. I made a decision then. Leave the car and walk. There was no signal and no way to fix. I hadn't done a proper solo camping trip in over a year, and it had been eating at me every day. Life had been getting in the way, work, family stuff, bills, injuries, broken gear. You name it, it probably slowed me down. But by late August, I'd finally cleared a long weekend, packed up my gear, and drove out to a remote stretch of forest I'd only passed through once, about 2 years ago. The area wasn't famous. No big-name trails, no amenities, just a web of old logging roads that zigzagged across a chunk of national forest land, somewhere a few hours north of where I lived. It had no cell service, few trail markers, and barely any traffic. Exactly what I was looking for. I had no big plan. I just wanted to be alone, walk a few miles in, pick a spot near a creek or some clearing, set up camp, cook over the fire, sleep early, and feel the weight of silence that only nature can offer. I didn't want crowds. I didn't want trail etiquette. I wanted stillness, damp leaves underfoot, and that kind of quiet that presses in from all sides until you forget about time. I parked the car just before noon, at the end of a rough gravel road. It was overgrown and half washed out in places. I knew most folks wouldn't even take their SUVs down it. I had a beat-up 4Runner with decent clearance, so I pushed through. When I stepped out, the heat hit me like a wall, humid and sticky. I was sweating before I even finished lacing my boots. I checked my pack, triple-checked my water, bear spray, knife, stove, tarp, food. Everything was there. Then I locked up the vehicle, slung on the pack, and started walking into the trees. The trail, if you could call it that, was just a narrow line in the underbrush. I followed it more by instinct than sight. The further I went, the more overgrown it got. Sometimes I'd lose it entirely and just navigate by terrain, looking for signs of old boot prints, a bent twig, or worn-down moss. It wasn't difficult hiking, just slow and careful. I didn't want to twist an ankle this far out. By mid-afternoon, I'd made it about 4 or 5 miles in. I found a flat, shaded area near a wide bend in a shallow creek, with soft ground and a natural windbreak of boulders on one side. It wasn't ideal for views, but it was perfect for seclusion and shelter. I dropped my pack and just stood there for a few minutes, listening. No engine sounds, no airplanes, just water trickling, leaves rustling in the breeze, and an occasional creak of some unseen branch. It was exactly what I needed. I set up camp with care. I always do it the same way. Tent first, then rainfly, stakes tight, then food storage hung far from where I'd sleep. I took my time gathering wood, not just for the fire, but so I could scout the area. I noticed a few things while I collected it. First, there were some old fire rings nearby, blackened stones in a rough circle, half collapsed with age. Second, I saw a strange number of broken branches low to the ground, almost like something had been dragging through the underbrush recently. At first, I chalked it up to deer or elk, maybe even a black bear. There were tracks, but nothing fresh. I pushed it out of my mind. That night, I cooked over the fire something simple, rice and canned chicken mixed with seasoning. I ate slowly, sitting on a log I'd dragged over. I didn't need to talk or think or do anything. The air cooled down as the sun dropped, and by nightfall, I was in my sleeping bag, reading by headlamp for a few minutes before turning it off and closing my eyes. It didn't take long to fall asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. Not fully, just enough to feel off. I couldn't hear the creek anymore. The wind had died. It wasn't dead silent. Bugs still chirped, but there was something about the quiet that felt wrong. Heavier, like it was trying to hide something. I laid there, barely breathing, trying to figure out why I'd stirred. Maybe a dream, maybe some animal. I didn't hear footsteps, no snapping twigs, just the same sounds, steady, low, and far. Eventually, I fell back asleep, but the feeling stayed with me. The next morning, I got up with the sun and made coffee over the fire, boiling water in my small pot, dumping in some instant. Tasted bitter, but I didn't care. As I walked down to the creek to rinse out my mug, I saw fresh marks in the soil. They weren't shoe prints, at least not boots. Just long grooves, like something had been dragged again. But I couldn't find a clear beginning or end to the marks. No claw shapes, no paw prints, just long, weird streaks in the mud and flattened grass. I tried not to think too much of it. Could have been a tree limb that got caught and dragged downhill by an animal. Still, I felt unsettled. I decided to stay in camp that day instead of hiking further. I wanted to get a better feel for the area, maybe build up the fire ring, gather more wood, just settle in more fully. But even as I moved around, I kept glancing up from my tasks. I felt watched, though I never saw anything. Around noon, I hiked up a small ridge behind my camp, just to get a better view. From the top, I could see the wide stretch of trees below, maybe a mile of uninterrupted green. The forerunner was somewhere far behind that. I marked my path carefully as I went and made sure I didn't lose sight of where my camp was. I came back down and noticed something strange. A small pile of rocks had been stacked near the edge of the clearing. I hadn't seen it before. It looked deliberate, not just random. 5 or 6 stones, smooth and round, stacked in a small cone. I stared at it a while. There were no fresh footprints near it. No sign of anyone walking through. I knocked it over without thinking and tried to focus on something else. That night, the forest felt different again. The stillness returned. I sat by the fire until it was just glowing embers, watching the edges of the trees, half expecting something to move, but nothing did. Eventually, I crawled back into the tent, zipped up, and laid down, knife tucked near my leg. It must have been around 3 a.m. when I woke again. This time, I knew I'd heard something. A snap, a crunch. It was close, maybe 15, 20 feet away. I laid perfectly still, ears straining. Another crunch, soft, measured. Something was definitely moving outside. I sat up slowly and reached for the knife. My heartbeat was pounding now, loud enough that I felt it in my throat. The steps stopped for a moment, then shifted. I heard what sounded like something brushing against my tent. Faint, but distinct. Not claws, not paws. More like cloth or canvas dragging. I didn't speak. I didn't move. Just waited, trying to calm my breath. After a few minutes, the sounds faded. Whatever it was, it moved off. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At dawn, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The fire pit was undisturbed. My gear was all where I'd left it, but the stack of rocks was back. Same place, same shape, carefully balanced again. That was it. I packed everything, fast. No breakfast, no coffee, just jammed everything into my pack, took down the tent in record time, and threw the bear bag into my pack without even repacking it right. I didn't stop to rest. I just wanted to be gone. The trail back felt different. Not harder, just longer. I kept checking behind me. I never saw anyone, but the woods had gone dead again. Not quiet, dead. No birds, no rustling. Even the wind was gone. It was like the whole place was holding its breath. Took me nearly 4 hours to reach the car. My legs were shaking, my shirt was soaked, and my throat felt dry even though I'd drunk plenty of water. When I saw the forerunner, I almost dropped to my knees, but it wasn't over. When I reached the driver's side, I saw it. The same stack of rocks, placed right in front of the door. Not thrown, placed, the exact same shape as before. I didn't touch them. I stepped around, unlocked the passenger side, and climbed over into the driver's seat from inside. I started the engine and reversed without looking back. The road out was rougher than before, washed out in new places. I didn't stop until I hit pavement again, miles down. When I finally got to a gas station with signal, I sat in the lot for an hour before I even fueled up. Just sitting there, gripping the wheel, trying to make sense of it all. I never saw a person, never heard a voice, never caught a clear look at what was out there. But someone or something was watching me, following me, close enough to place things near me, close enough to move silently in the night and get right up next to my tent without waking me fully. Maybe they wanted to scare me. Maybe they were just trying to send a message. But whatever the reason, it worked. I got the message. I haven't been back to that part of the forest since. I haven't even looked it up on a map. I still camp sometimes, but never alone, never that far out. And every now and then, when I step into the trees, I still think about those stacks of rocks. Small, silent warnings. No words, just a message. You don't belong here, and I've never forgotten it. I went camping last summer in a place I'd never been before, a wide patch of dense forest about 5 hours north of where I live. It was something I had been planning for months. I had taken a few weeks off work, stocked up on food, water, and gear, and made a rough plan of where I wanted to go. I didn't want to camp at any of those crowded sites with fire pits and toilets and RVs all around. I wanted to be alone. That was the whole point. I'd been working nonstop for over a year and needed to disconnect from everything and everyone. Just me, the trees, and quiet. I had found the spot by scanning satellite maps. It was way off the main roads, in a dense green patch without any signs of roads or buildings. I marked a spot near a narrow, winding river, packed my car with my backpack and gear, and drove off early one morning while the sky was still pale. I drove past the last gas station, then down a gravel road that was more pothole than road, and finally parked near a dirt trail that looked mostly unused. It was just before noon when I locked up my car, slung my pack on, and started walking. The trail started off as a faint path, barely wider than my boots, and quickly disappeared after a few minutes. I had a compass, a printed map, and my phone, though there was no signal. I wasn't worried about getting lost because I had taken notes and was confident I could find my way. I followed the edge of a long ridge, then crossed a small stream, and kept going deeper into the forest. The trees were thick and tall, mostly pine, with dry needles all over the forest floor that made everything soft and quiet. After about 4 hours of hiking, I reached the spot I had marked on the map. It was perfect. A small flat clearing next to a bend in the river, with thick trees on all sides but enough space to see the sky. The river was slow and shallow there, with smooth stones along the bank and cold, clear water. I dropped my pack, stretched my back, and started setting up camp. I pitched my small green tent close to the tree line for some shade, set up my sleeping bag, unpacked my food, and gathered some dry branches for a fire later that night. The first day was peaceful. I boiled some water for instant noodles, ate slowly while sitting on a rock near the river, then walked around a bit to get a feel for the area. I didn't see any trash, no signs of people, just squirrels, birds, and the sound of wind moving through the trees. That night, I sat by my little fire, warming my hands and staring at the flames, feeling the tension slowly melt out of my body. When the fire burned down to glowing coals, I zipped up my tent and lay on my back, listening to the sound of the river outside. I fell asleep faster than I had in months. I woke up once in the night to pee and stepped out into the cold air. The forest was pitch black, the kind of black where you can't see your own hand in front of your face. I used my flashlight to find a spot a little away from the tent, did what I had to do, then came back and zipped up again. Everything was still, not even the usual rustling of branches. It was dead silent. I remember thinking that was a little weird, but I was half asleep and just went back under my sleeping bag and knocked out again. The second day, I hiked upstream along the river with just a small day pack. I caught sight of a few deer and a fox that darted away as soon as it saw me. I refilled my water bottle from the river using my filter and chewed on some trail mix as I walked. I followed the river for a few hours, then turned back. When I got back to my camp, everything was exactly as I left it. I made a fire, ate some canned soup, then sat with my legs crossed watching the sky turn from orange to blue to dark. It was colder that night. I had to put on a second layer before crawling into my sleeping bag. That night, something woke me up. It wasn't a sound, exactly. More like the feeling that something was off. I opened my eyes in the dark, listening. The air inside the tent felt still, but I could hear something faint through the fabric. A soft crunching sound, like leaves being stepped on. It was slow. One crunch, then nothing, then another. I lay there frozen, holding my breath, straining to hear more. Kept going. Just one slow step every few seconds. It didn't sound like an animal. Too heavy, too slow. It sounded like someone walking. I stayed absolutely still for maybe a full minute, then very slowly reached for my flashlight. I didn't turn it on. I just held it, waiting, listening. The footsteps moved a bit closer, then stopped completely. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing. I wasn't sure what to do. I kept thinking it was probably just an animal. Maybe a deer moving through the trees, or even a raccoon. But something about the slowness of the steps made me uneasy. It wasn't how animals move. Felt cautious, careful. Eventually, after what felt like forever, I didn't hear anything more. Just the river again, the same steady flow as always. I stayed awake for another hour, eyes wide open, flashlight still in my hand. Then I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, the sky was light and the tent was warming up from the sun. I stepped outside and looked around. The ground was soft from pine needles, so no clear footprints, but I walked in a wide circle around the tent anyway. I didn't see anything. No broken branches, no trash, nothing disturbed. I tried to shake off the weird feeling and told myself it was probably a deer. Maybe moving slow because it smelled me and wasn't sure where I was. I made oatmeal, stretched my legs, and decided to take a longer hike to clear my head. I left my tent behind again and followed a ridge uphill. It was steep and rough, but the view from the top was beautiful. Miles and miles of untouched forest, just green trees and blue sky and the silver ribbon of the river. I sat on a flat rock at the top and ate a protein bar while watching birds circle far above the trees. I stayed up there for hours, just thinking about nothing, enjoying the feeling of being away from everything. When I got back to camp that evening, the firewood I had stacked near the tent was scattered. Not a lot, just enough to notice. A few pieces were lying several feet away, like they'd been kicked or knocked over. I stopped and stared at them for a while. Then I looked at my tent. It was zipped up like I left it. I walked around slowly, checking everything. Nothing was missing. My backpack was closed, food bags untouched, tent intact. Still, something felt off. That night, I built the fire bigger. Not huge, but bigger than before. I didn't want to be in the dark. I sat close to it, holding a stick and poking at the flames, listening to the woods. The wind had picked up, and the trees creaked a little. Still, I kept hearing faint sounds. Not clear footsteps, just occasional cracking noises. Maybe it was the wind knocking down branches. I tried to tell myself that. When the fire burned low, I stayed outside until the last coal went cold before crawling into my tent. I kept my flashlight next to me again. I didn't sleep much. At some point in the night, I heard it again. This time it was clearer. Soft, deliberate steps near the tree line. Then stopping. Then a few more steps, slower this time. Then silence. I didn't dare move. I just stared at the top of the tent and held my breath. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't want to give away that I was awake. I just lay there, heart pounding, until I heard the sound move away, fading slowly into the distance. In the morning, I walked the area again. Nothing. No trash, no footprints, no broken branches. But something was wrong. A piece of twine I had used to tie a bag of trash high up in a tree was snapped. The bag was gone. I looked all around and found it about 20 feet away on the ground, torn open, trash scattered. But it wasn't chewed up like a raccoon had gotten into it. It looked like someone had just pulled it down and dumped it. I packed everything up quickly that morning. I didn't want to spend another night there. I wasn't scared of animals, but I was starting to believe someone else was out there, watching me, maybe even coming into my camp when I was gone or asleep. The place that had felt so peaceful just a couple days earlier now felt wrong, like I didn't belong there anymore. I hiked fast, barely stopping to drink. I checked behind me often, heart jumping at every branch snap or gust of wind. The walk back to the car took almost 5 hours again, and I never relaxed the entire time. I didn't see anyone, but I kept imagining someone just out of sight, following me, stepping where I couldn't hear. When I reached the road and saw my car, I felt this huge wave of relief. I threw my gear into the back, locked the doors, and drove without stopping until I hit a gas station an hour away. I didn't even use the bathroom until then. I just wanted distance between me and that forest. Back home, I went over everything again in my head. I checked my GPS logs, my map, the pictures I had taken. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been out there. Not some wild animal. Person. Someone who knew the woods better than I did. Someone who watched me from the trees, moved through the dark while I was asleep, took their time, didn't leave signs. Someone who didn't want me there. Or maybe worse, someone who did. I haven't been camping since.